Now, SB 1252 relating to payroll records in Labor Code Section 226. This new law gave a right to employees or former employees to receive an actual copy of the pay records. Prior to this, they just had a right to inspect the records. And so this is a new requirement, and it's a good reminder, part of the refresher I mentioned earlier, it's a good reminder for employers to look at and make sure that they have compliant procedures in place about the different deadlines you have in responding to an employee's request for various employment documents under California law. And generally, current and former employees have a right to their personnel records under Labor Code Section 1198.5, as I have up on this slide. This code section provides that every current and former employee or their representative has a right to inspect and receive a copy of their personnel records. In terms of requests pursuant to this section, the request has to be made in writing through two methods. One is written and submitted by the current or former employee or their representative, or two, written and submitted by the current or former employee or their representative by completing an employer-provided form. The employers can require that these requests come through certain channels and on certain forms. So employers have to comply with these personnel record requests no later than 30 calendar days from receipt of the written request. Now, the big catch here is the terms personnel records or personnel file. You know, we talk about these a lot, but surprisingly, it comes to surprise many employers in California, the terms personnel records or personnel file are not defined in the Labor Code. And because the Labor Code section here, 1198.5, refers to these terms, personnel records, but never defines the term, there's a lot of ambiguity about what documents should be kept in an employee's personnel file and what documents have to be made available upon request to inspect or copy the personnel records. So while not legally binding on employers, there is some guidance from the Division of Labor Standards Enforcement expressing some views on what generally should be considered to be contained in personnel records. And the DLSE has set out that the documents in the personnel records are documents that are generally used or have been used to determine an employee's qualifications for promotion, additional compensation, or disciplinary action, including termination. They set out some examples in an opinion letter of what should be in a personnel file. And again, this is not binding on employers. It's more of a guidance to take into consideration. But it sets out that application for employment, payroll authorization forms, notices of commendation, warning, discipline, or termination notices, notices of layoff, leaves of absence and vacation, also notices of wage attachment and garnishment, and any other kind of notices related to education and training records, and obviously performance appraisals and reviews and attendance records. It does set out what the section does not apply to, and it does not apply to records relating to the investigation of a possible criminal offense. Employers don't have to turn those documents over. 2, letters of reference, those don't have to be turned over. And 3, ratings reports or records that were obtained prior to the employee's employment prepared by certain committee members or obtained in connection with promotional examination. So in addition to that, employers may redact the names of any non-supervisory employee contained in the personnel file that's being requested before that's turned over. So employers need to be careful about, look at these requests carefully and just not have a knee-jerk reaction that there's a personnel file request that comes in from an attorney or former employee and just turn over those documents. But really think through what's kept in a personnel file and what's not, and then see if any of these names should be redacted for non-supervisory employees. And if you keep certain documents in different files other than personnel files, I think you have a good argument that you don't have to turn those over. So some thought should be provided to this aspect.